The massive doors of the Galactic Federation Academy's physical education complex slid open with a soft hiss. The gathered alien students turned their heads, appendages, and sensory organs toward the entrance. There, standing in the doorway, was something most of them had only seen in educational videos or news reports: a human. Tom walked into the gym, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The artificial gravity felt slightly off to him, calibrated to accommodate the various alien species present. Some students floated in anti-gravity bubbles, while others slithered or hovered near the ground. A group of crystalline beings sparkled under the ambient lighting as they whispered among themselves. "Look at its dense muscle structure," one floating blob of green gas muttered to its partner. "They say humans can lift many times their own body weight. I heard they can repair broken bones naturally." Another student with 6 legs and metallic skin added, "without any medical intervention." Tom tried to ignore the comments as he made his way to the instructor's podium. He'd been warned about this when he applied for the exchange program. Earth was classified as a death world, and its inhabitants were often viewed with a mixture of fear and fascination by the galactic community. The gym itself was a marvel of engineering. Different sections maintained various gravity levels, atmospheric compositions, and temperature zones to accommodate the diverse student body. Tom noticed some areas were filled with liquid, others with different gas mixtures, and some that seemed to defy the laws of physics as he understood them. Professor Gray, a tall instructor with an exoskeleton that reminded Tom of a praying mantis, checked something on his floating screen. "Ah, the human exchange student. Welcome to Advanced Physical Development class." The professor's translator rendered his clicks and chirps into standard galactic common. "I see you've been cleared by medical for full participation." "Yes, sir," Tom replied, standing straight but trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. Back on Earth, he'd been just another average student in PE class. Here, his every movement drew stares. A small crowd of students had gathered at what they considered a safe distance. A floating orb of blue energy pulsed with curiosity. "Professor, I thought Deathworlders were restricted from physical contact sports. Won't it be dangerous having it?" Him in class. Professor Gray's antennae twitched in what Tom had learned was a sign of amusement. "The human has been properly briefed on safety protocols. Remember, class, exposure to different species and their capabilities is part of your education." Tom spotted an empty changing area and headed toward it, carefully maneuvering around a student who seemed to be made entirely of living gas. The locker room was a testament to galactic engineering, with sections adapted for every conceivable body type and environmental need. As he changed into his academy-issued exercise clothes, Tom could hear the other students outside still discussing him. Their translators weren't quite quiet enough to prevent him from hearing their conversations. "Did you know humans regularly expose themselves to dihydrogen monoxide? They even immerse themselves in it. I heard they can continue moving with multiple fractures. They just ignore the pain. Someone told me they can eat almost anything, even substances that would dissolve our digestive chambers." Tom smiled to himself as he finished changing. The exercise clothes were designed to adapt to various species, and they adjusted to fit his human form perfectly. He hadn't expected to become the center of attention simply by showing up for gym class. When he stepped out of the changing area, the class was beginning to organize into their usual groups. Professor Gray was adjusting the environmental controls for the day's activities. Tom noticed how some students required anti-gravity fields to move comfortably, while others needed high-gravity zones just to maintain their form. The professor's voice cut through the chatter. "Today we'll begin with standard physical assessments to establish baseline capabilities for our new student. Everyone to their designated areas." Tom took a deep breath and walked toward his assigned spot. He couldn't help but notice how the other students moved away, creating a wider circle around him than necessary. He wasn't sure if it was fear, respect, or simple curiosity, but he knew one thing. This was going to be an interesting semester. The artificial lights gleamed off various alien surfaces, scales, crystals, metal, and energy forms. In this diverse gathering of galactic life, Tom stood out not for any extraordinary features, but for appearing deceptively ordinary. Little did his classmates know that this seemingly simple human was about to challenge everything they thought they knew about physical capabilities. Professor Gray activated his hovering display screen, which projected a holographic chart into the air. The mantis-like instructor's antennae twitched as he addressed the class. For our new students' benefit, we will demonstrate the standard assessment routines for each biological category. The first to step forward was a student made of pure energy, glowing in shades of blue and white. They moved through their assessment with graceful pulses, demonstrating energy output levels that made the measuring devices hum with activity. Their form twisted and stretched in ways that defied normal physics, passing through specialized rings that measured their control and precision. Next came a crystalline being who sparkled under the gym's adaptive lighting. They demonstrated their species' ability to refract and absorb different energy wavelengths, creating a dazzling display of light manipulation. The assessment devices recorded their performance with rapid clicks and beeps. Tom watched carefully as each alien student showcased their natural abilities. A gas-form student demonstrated density control, compressing and expanding their form through various challenges. A low-gravity species performed intricate aerial maneuvers in their designated anti-gravity zone, their multiple limbs moving in perfect coordination. "Now then," Professor Gray announced, turning to Tom, "according to your file, you require Earth standard gravity for optimal performance." The instructor's compound eyes studied the human with scientific curiosity. "Yes, sir," Tom replied. "1G would be perfect." A wave of murmurs swept through the class. The floating gas student compressed themselves in shock. "But Professor, that's Deathworld gravity. It could damage the equipment." Professor Gray raised one of his blade-like arms for silence. "The facility is rated for all council-approved gravity levels. However," he paused, mandibles clicking thoughtfully, "are you certain you wouldn't prefer a reduced setting for your first assessment?" Tom shook his head. "Standard Earth gravity will be fine. It's what I'm used to." The professor nodded and input commands into the control panel. A circular section of the floor lit up with a soft blue glow. "The assessment area is now set to Earth standard gravity. Please proceed when ready." Tom stepped into the circle. Several alien students flinched as the gravity increased, expecting him to be crushed. Instead, they watched in amazement as he began basic stretches, his joints moving in ways that made some of them feel uncomfortable just watching. "First test will measure basic mobility and flexibility," Professor Gray announced, his voice professionally neutral despite his obvious fascination. "Please perform standard range of motion exercises." Tom started with simple arm circles. The alien students watched in horror as his shoulders rotated in full 360-degree movements. A crystalline student actually cracked slightly in shock when Tom touched his toes, folding his body in half at the waist. "By the void, its spine," gasped one hovering student. "It's breaking itself." "This is normal human flexibility," Professor Gray explained, though his antennae were twitching rapidly with interest. "Humans possess a remarkable combination of rigid and flexible support structures." The next test involved basic strength assessment. Tom began with standard push-ups, his steady movements drawing more attention than the most exotic alien abilities had. The way his muscles flexed and moved under his skin caused several students to emit various signs of distress in their respective biological ways. "Professor," called out a metallic-skinned student, "the gravity readings must be wrong. No organic being should be able to move so easily under such pressure." "The readings are accurate," Professor Gray responded, checking his instruments. "This is, indeed, normal human performance under their standard gravity." Tom completed his set of push-ups and stood up, barely breathing hard. The monitoring devices were working overtime, trying to make sense of his vital signs. His elevated heart rate and increased skin temperature caused particular concern among the observing students. "It's experiencing rapid internal pressure changes," one student observed with alarm. and its surface is becoming wet. This is normal human thermoregulation, Professor Gray explained, though he kept one limb near the emergency controls. They release excess heat through liquid secretion. As Tom prepared for the next test, he could see the class's perception of him shifting. What had started as fearful curiosity was becoming something closer to academic fascination. Even Professor Gray had given up any pretense of this being a routine assessment, his compound eyes fixed on Tom's every movement as he input data into his device. The assessment was far from over, but Tom had already changed how these aliens viewed human physical capabilities. He couldn't help but smile as he heard one crystal student whisper to another, "Maybe we should pay more attention to Deathworld biology studies after all." Professor Gray's assessment moved into its next phase. The monitoring devices hummed steadily as Tom prepared for the endurance tests. What happened next would be talked about in the Academy's halls for cycles to come. "We'll begin with sustained locomotion," Professor Gray announced. "Standard duration is 50 time units, or until you require cessation." The professor's translator struggled slightly with the concept of minutes, defaulting to the galactic standard instead. Tom nodded and started jogging at a steady pace. The class watched, waiting for him to stop. They kept waiting and waiting. "Its movements are so repetitive," observed a floating gas student. "How does it not lose structural integrity?" At the 10-minute mark, worried whispers spread through the class. Tom's skin had developed a noticeable sheen of sweat, and his breathing had become more pronounced. Several students moved to alert Professor Gray. "Professor, the human is leaking, and its respiratory rate has increased significantly." The crystalline student's facets flickered with concern. Professor Gray checked his readings. "These are expected human biological responses. They maintain homeostasis through liquid cooling and increased oxygen intake." 20 minutes passed. Tom kept running. 30 minutes, still running. The alien students had long since abandoned their own exercises to watch this display of Deathworlder stamina. Some had started taking notes. "It just keeps going," muttered a metallic-skinned student in awe. "No breaks, no signs of structural failure. How is this possible?" Finally, at the 40-minute mark, Professor Gray raised a limb. "You may stop now. This is most impressive." Tom slowed to a walk, his shirt darkened with sweat. Several students recoiled at the sight, still unsure if he was melting or not. He grabbed his water bottle and took a long drink, causing another wave of murmurs as the class watched him voluntarily ingest liquid. "Next, we'll test upper body strength," Professor Gray announced, trying to maintain his professional demeanor despite his obvious fascination. "Please approach the gravity-adjusted bar." Tom walked to the pull-up bar, which had been specially reinforced after the earlier gravity demonstration. He jumped up, grabbed the bar, and began performing pull-ups. The smooth motion of his body rising and lowering caused several gasps among the watching students. "Its limbs," exclaimed a hovering student. "They're bending against the gravity." What really got their attention was when Tom switched to one-armed pull-ups. A crystal student actually had to be steadied by their classmates, their structure vibrating with shock. "Professor," called out the energy being, their form pulsing with excitement, "is this typical for their species?" Professor Gray consulted his database. According to records, this is moderate performance for a human of this age and fitness level. The class erupted in shocked discussions. Moderate? What were peak humans capable of if this was just average? Tom moved on to the next exercise station. As he prepared to demonstrate human jumping capability, he couldn't help but notice several students had started recording the session with their personal devices. His vertical leap caused another round of startled exclamations. "It just temporarily nullified gravity," shouted one student. "No," corrected Professor Gray. "That was purely mechanical force generated by muscle power and skeletal leverage." The assessment continued with tests of agility and coordination. Tom's ability to change direction quickly, balance on one leg, and perform complex movements in three-dimensional space left his alien classmates struggling to understand how an organic being from a high-gravity world could be so mobile. What really stunned them was when Tom started doing handstands. The sight of a human voluntarily inverting himself and maintaining balance on just his upper limbs was almost too much for some students to process. But the blood, stammered a gaseous student. How does it not all rush to its thinking organ? Professor Gray's antennae twitched with scientific excitement as he explained. Humans have evolved specialized circulatory systems to handle blood flow in various positions. Their bodies automatically adjust to maintain proper distribution. As the class session neared its end, Tom completed his last exercise. He was tired but satisfied. The alien students had abandoned all pretense of maintaining distance, clustering around to observe him more closely while still staying just out of reach. Even Professor Gray had given up trying to maintain his usual detached demeanor. In all my cycles of teaching, I've never, he paused, composing himself. We will need to recalibrate our understanding of organic physical capabilities. Tom grabbed his towel, wiping away the sweat that had caused so much concern among his classmates. He couldn't help but smile as he heard one student say to another, "Wait until the rest of the school hears about this. A Deathworlder isn't just strong. They're unstoppable." The news of Tom's physical assessment spread through the academy faster than a quantum transmission. As students filed into the gym the next day, the atmosphere crackled with excitement. The energy form student, Blue, hovered near the entrance, their usually steady glow pulsing with intense patterns. "Human," Blue called out as Tom entered the gym. Their translated voice carried across the space, causing other students to stop and watch. "I wish to propose a challenge." Professor Gray's antennae twitched with concern as he moved closer to the gathering crowd. "Blue is our top athlete in the Energy Conversion Division," he explained to Tom. "They hold several academy records." Tom looked at the glowing being, whose form shifted between shades of blue and white. "What kind of challenge did you have in mind?" Blue's glow intensified. "A comprehensive test. The obstacle course." Their form expanded slightly, but modified to accommodate both our unique abilities. The other students burst into excited chatter. The obstacle course was legendary at the academy, designed to test multiple species' capabilities simultaneously. A crystalline student's facets sparkled with excitement as they quickly set up a betting pool using their personal devices. Professor Gray raised several of his limbs for silence. "While I appreciate the sporting spirit, we must consider safety protocols." "I accept," Tom said, causing several gaseous students to compress themselves in shock. Blue's glow pulsed with satisfaction. "Excellent. Professor, would you oversee the modifications to ensure fairness?" Professor Gray's compound eye studied both competitors before he finally nodded. "Very well. But we will establish strict parameters." He moved to the control panel, his limbs dancing over the controls. "The course will be divided into 3 sections: energy manipulation, physical obstacles, and environmental challenges." The gym's floor began to shift and reconfigure. Sections rose and fell, creating a complex landscape of barriers, platforms, and energy fields. Some areas glowed with various forms of radiation that Blue could interact with, while others featured solid obstacles that would test Tom's physical capabilities. "The rules are simple," Professor Gray announced. "Complete all 3 sections. Each competitor must attempt every obstacle. No direct interference with your opponent is allowed." He paused, looking at both contestants. "And no permanent structural damage to yourself or the facility." As the professor explained the rules, students began taking positions around the course for better viewing angles. The crystalline beings refracted their bodies to create impromptu recording devices, while gaseous students spread out to catch every angle of the upcoming competition. "The first section will test energy manipulation and conversion," Professor Gray continued. "The second will focus on physical navigation and strength. The final section combines environmental adaptation challenges." Tom studied the course carefully. He could see areas where Blue would clearly have the advantage. energy gates they could simply pass through, radiation fields they could absorb for power. But there were also sections with solid obstacles, gravity variations, and physical challenges where his human capabilities might give him an edge. Are your structural support systems properly prepared? Blue asked Tom, their form flickering with what might have been concern or anticipation. You mean, am I warmed up? Yes, Tom replied, doing a few quick stretches that made several nearby students wince at his joints' range of motion. Professor Gray moved to the starting position. Competitors ready. Both Tom and Blue took their positions. Remember, this is a friendly academic competition. The goal is to learn from our different evolutionary advantages. The crystalline student managing the betting pool quickly finalized the last wagers. The odds heavily favored Blue, whose energy-based abilities were well known throughout the academy. Very few had bet on the human, despite his recent display of physical prowess. Begin on the third pulse, Professor Gray announced. A holographic countdown appeared above the course. Tom took a deep breath, his muscles tensing in preparation. Beside him, Blue's form condensed into a more streamlined shape, their glow intensifying with competitive energy. The first pulse lit up the gym. Students held their breath, or whatever passed for breathing in their species. Second pulse, Tom's heart rate increased slightly, while Blue's energy field hummed with power. Third pulse. The race that would change the Academy's understanding of human capabilities was about to begin. The third pulse flashed, and both competitors launched into action. Blue transformed into a streak of pure energy, shooting through the first section of the course with incredible speed. Tom sprinted forward, his feet pounding against the reinforced track. The first challenge was a series of energy gates that required specific frequencies to pass through. Blue flowed through them effortlessly, changing their energy signature with each barrier. Tom had to rely on the physical bypass routes, ducking, jumping, and rolling under or over solid obstacles. Look at how the human moves, gasped a crystalline student. Its whole body works together like a single unit. Blue maintained their lead through the energy manipulation section, but the gap wasn't as wide as many had expected. Tom's agility and quick decision-making helped him navigate the physical alternatives efficiently. Then came the second section, physical obstacles. Here, the tables began to turn. Tom's eyes lit up at the sight of climbing walls, balance beams, and strength-testing barriers. Blue, now forced to maintain a semi-solid form to interact with physical objects, moved more cautiously. Tom grabbed the first climbing wall and began ascending rapidly, his fingers and toes finding holds that seemed impossibly small to the watching aliens. Blue tried to float up, but found their energy form disrupted by damping fields that required actual physical contact with the wall. The Deathworlder is showing remarkable adaptation, Professor Gray noted, his antennae twitching with scientific interest. Observe how it uses its body weight and momentum to maximize efficiency. The next challenge was a series of suspended platforms at different gravity levels. Blue struggled to maintain their form as they passed through the varying gravitational fields. Tom, however, adapted quickly, using the changing gravity to his advantage. He would push off hard and high gravity sections, letting the momentum carry him through low gravity zones. That's impossible, shouted a gaseous student as Tom executed a perfect flip between platforms. It's calculating gravitational physics in real time. Not calculating, Professor Gray corrected. Instinct. Humans evolved with constant gravity shifts due to movement. They process it unconsciously. The gap between the competitors narrowed. Blue's early lead from the energy section had almost disappeared. They reached the final section, environmental challenges, nearly simultaneously. This section combined everything: energy fields, physical barriers, and rapidly changing environmental conditions. The temperature shifted from freezing to boiling. Gravity fluctuated wildly, and the air composition changed constantly. Blue struggled with the physical obstacles but excelled in energy-rich environments. Tom's endurance began to show its worth. While the rapid environmental changes slowed him down, his body's natural adaptation mechanisms kept him going. His sweating, which had horrified his classmates earlier, now helped him regulate his temperature through the extreme changes. Notice how the human's biological cooling system adapts to both hot and cold environments, Professor Gray pointed out to the fascinated class. A remarkable evolutionary feature. The final stretch involved a series of alternating challenges. Blue would surge ahead in energy-based sections, while Tom would catch up in physical ones. The alien students watched in awe as both competitors demonstrated the unique advantages of their species. Tom's breathing was heavy, his shirt soaked with sweat, but he kept pushing. Blue's glow had dimmed slightly, their energy reserves depleting, but they maintained their form with determination. Both competitors were learning to respect each other's capabilities. They're both showing signs of fatigue, observed the metallic student, but in completely different ways. The finish line approached. Blue gathered their remaining energy for a final burst. Tom's legs pumped harder, his muscles pushing through the burn. They crossed the finish line so close together that Professor Gray had to check the quantum timing sensors. Remarkable, the professor announced. Blue wins by 0.3 time units. Instead of celebrating, Blue reformed next to Tom, their glow pulsing with what seemed like respect. You almost beat me. I didn't think a solid being could move like that. Tom, still catching his breath, smiled. And I'd never seen anyone move through energy fields so beautifully. That was incredible. The watching students erupted in excited discussions, their betting pool forgotten. They had just witnessed something unprecedented, a demonstration that different evolutionary paths could lead to equally impressive capabilities. Professor Gray's antennae twitched with satisfaction. Perhaps, he announced to the class, we all have something to learn from each other's biological advantages, even those from Deathworlds. The next few days passed without incident as the excitement of the competition settled into a new normal. Tom and Blue had become unlikely friends, often demonstrating their unique abilities to curious classmates. But nobody expected how valuable their different capabilities would prove to be. It started during a routine class session. Professor Gray was demonstrating proper form for energy conservation exercises when the gym's main control panel sparked and sputtered. The gravity regulators began to malfunction. Warning lights flashed across the facility as the environmental systems went haywire. Different sections of the gym started experiencing random gravity fluctuations. Some areas spiked to 3 times standard gravity, while others dropped to near zero. Emergency protocols initiated, the automated system announced in multiple languages. Gravity control failure detected. Backup systems not responding. Professor Gray moved quickly to the control panel, his limbs working frantically. The system isn't responding to override commands. Everyone remain calm and activate your personal gravity stabilizers. But not all students had personal stabilizers. Some of the crystalline beings began to crack under the strain of increased gravity. The gaseous students were being compressed or dispersed depending on their location. Even Blue's energy form flickered dangerously as they tried to maintain cohesion. Tom, however, was already moving. His human body, evolved under constant gravity, adapted quickly to the changes. He ran toward the nearest crystalline student, who was starting to fracture under the intense gravitational pressure. "Hold still," he called out, reaching the struggling alien. Using the techniques he learned in Earth's variable gravity training, Tom braced himself and lifted the crystalline being. His muscles strained as he carried them to a safe zone where the gravity remained stable. How are you moving through these gravity fields?" the crystalline student asked, their facets realigning in the normalized gravity. Tom didn't stop to answer. He spotted a group of gaseous students being compressed in a high-gravity pocket. Running through the shifting gravity zones, he reached the environmental controls for that section. With strength that amazed the watching aliens, he manually forced the emergency venting system open, creating an escape path for the compressed students. "Blue," he shouted across the gym, "can you help stabilize the energy fields around the liquid environment students?" Blue pulsed with understanding and moved to help, their energy form working to contain the destabilizing fields that kept the liquid-breathing students safe in their environment. Professor Gray's voice cut through the chaos. The main power core is overloading. We need to reach the manual shutdown, but it's in a section with dangerous gravity fluctuations. Tom looked at the direction the professor indicated. The path to the shutdown controls was experiencing random gravity shifts between extremely high and low levels. Most aliens would be crushed or flung away trying to reach it. "I can get there," Tom said, already plotting his route. Years of human sports and obstacle courses had prepared him for this, though he'd never imagined using those skills to save an alien gym class. He began his approach, timing the gravity fluctuations. When a high-gravity wave hit, he used it to anchor himself. In low gravity, he controlled his movements with the precision he'd learned from sports training. His human vestibular system, evolved to handle constant motion and direction changes, kept him oriented despite the chaos. The alien students watched in awe as Tom navigated the shifting gravity fields. He stumbled once when a particularly strong wave hit, but his natural human balance helped him recover. Finally, he reached the shutdown controls. The panel needs physical force to activate the emergency shutdown, Professor Gray called out. It may be too strong under the current gravity conditions. Tom grinned. Good thing humans evolved on a high-gravity world. He braced himself and pushed against the emergency lever. His muscles strained as he fought both the mechanical resistance and the fluctuating gravity. With a grunt of effort, he forced the lever down. The gravity fields stabilized immediately. Emergency backup systems came online, restoring normal environmental conditions throughout the gym. Sighs of relief echoed from various species as they regained their stability. "Is everyone all right?" Tom asked, making his way back to the main group. He was sweating and breathing hard, but otherwise seemed unfazed by what he'd just done. The alien students looked at him with new understanding. This wasn't just about physical capabilities anymore. They'd just witnessed how human adaptability and quick thinking, combined with their natural physical abilities, could make the difference in a crisis. A week after the gravity control incident, the physical education complex looked very different. The emergency had changed more than just safety protocols. It had transformed how the entire class approached physical education. Professor Gray stood at his podium, his antennae moving with excitement as he addressed the class. "Today marks the beginning of our new integrated training program. Thanks to recent events, the Academy Board has approved our proposal for cross-species physical education." The gym had been redesigned with input from all species, including human safety standards. Tom noticed new emergency shoot-offs within easy reach of various heights and forms, and backup gravity stabilizers installed in every section. First, Professor Gray announced, "Our human student will demonstrate some Earth exercises that have been adapted for different physiologies." Tom stepped forward, no longer seeing the nervous flinches from his classmates. Instead, there was genuine interest in their various sensory organs. Even the crystalline students had oriented their facets toward him with attention. "We'll start with something simple called stretching," Tom explained. "Blue has helped me modify these movements for energy beings." He demonstrated a basic stretch, while Blue showed how their energy form could achieve similar flexibility through controlled expansion and contraction. The class watched as Tom and Blue moved through the routine together. A crystalline student raised a faceted appendage. "But how can beings like us perform such movements?" Tom smiled. "That's where it gets interesting. Professor Gray helped me understand how crystal beings can achieve similar benefits through controlled micro-adjustments in their lattice structure." One by one, students of different species tried the adapted exercises. Gaseous beings practiced controlled compression and expansion. Liquid form aliens learned to create internal currents that mimicked the muscle movements. Even the crystalline students found ways to flex and align their structures that improved their mobility. Notice how each species approaches the same basic movement differently, Professor Gray pointed out. This is true integration, not forcing everyone to move the same way, but understanding how each body type can achieve similar results. Blue hovered near Tom as they watched their classmates practice. When you first arrived, they pulsed softly. I thought having a Deathworlder in class would be dangerous. I never imagined it would lead to this. The next activity involved team exercises. Students were grouped across species, each contributing their unique abilities to solve physical challenges. A crystal student would refract light to create safe paths, while gaseous beings would help control environmental conditions. Energy forms like Blue provided power where needed, and Tom's human strength and endurance supported the team's physical needs. Remarkable, Professor Gray commented as he watched the groups work together. They're naturally compensating for each other's limitations and amplifying their strengths. During a water break, which still fascinated his alien classmates, Tom overheard two students talking. "Did you know," one whispered, "that the advanced xenobiology department is using our class as a case study? They're calling it the Deathworlder integration model." The most surprising change was in the Academy's attitudes toward human physical capabilities. What had once been seen as frightening or dangerous was now studied with respect and curiosity. Other classes had begun requesting joint sessions with the PE department to better understand how different species could work together. As the class wound down, Professor Gray made one final announcement. "The Academy Board has also approved our proposal for an interspecies athletic competition next semester. They believe our class has proven that diverse biological approaches to physical activity can coexist safely and beneficially." The students erupted in excited chatter. Tom felt a warm glow of pride as he watched his classmates discussing potential events and teams. Just weeks ago, many of them had been afraid to be in the same room with him. "You've changed things here," Blue said, their energy form glowing warmly. "Not just in this class, but in how the Academy thinks about biological differences." Tom looked around at his classmates, the crystalline beings practicing their new mobility techniques, the gaseous students perfecting their compression exercises, and the energy forms exploring new ways to interact with physical objects. Each one had taught him as much as he had taught them. "We all changed things," he replied. "We just needed to understand that being different doesn't mean being better or worse. It just means we have something unique to offer." As the class gathered their things to leave, Professor Gray's voice carried across the gym one last time. "Remember, students, in all my years of teaching, I've learned one truth. The universe's greatest strength is not in its uniformity, but in its diversity. Even a Deathworlder can show us new ways to grow." Tom smiled as he picked up his gym bag. He had come to the Academy hoping to learn about alien species. Instead, he had helped teach an entire school that what makes us different can make us stronger, together.